The armor we forgot we were wearing. You know what nobody tells you about being strong? That eventually your body forgets how to be anything else. That the armor you've been wearing so long starts to feel like skin. And when someone finally says, "Hey, you can take that off now," you look down and realize, "Oh, you don't even remember how." I recently had the honor of sitting down with Ida Woolridge, a woman whose story will probably make you cry a little, not a lot, and maybe, just maybe, give yourself permission to finally exhale. Ida is the kind of person who changes the world not through grand gestures, but through quiet courage. She's teaching us how to hold on to our sanity when blessings feel distant and purpose feels like a word from another language. She's navigating what I can only describe as a compounded grief that would break most people. She lost her 27-year-old son. 2 months later, her husband was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. 6 months after that, he had a cardiac arrest that nearly took his life. He went into remission, and then 2 days before Christmas, they learned the cancer was back and spreading. All while Ida worked two full time jobs and watched her youngest daughter prepare to move far away for college. And when I asked her how she was doing, she said something that stopped me cold. "I'm feeling overwhelmed and lost." Just being honest. Just being honest. As if honesty about pain is some kind of luxury we have to apologize for, as if admitting we're drowning is somehow a moral failing. Ida's courage to name her reality, to say out loud what so many of us are whispering in the dark, is exactly why her insights matter. Because she's not just surviving, she's teaching us how to let go of hustle as identity, how to rest without explanation, how to embrace healing and wholeness even when the world expects us to keep performing strength. Today, I want to share three truths that emerged from our conversation, truths grounded in research and real stories of family caregivers navigating terminal illness, compounded loss, and the kind of exhaustion that makes you forget what joy even tastes like. And I want to challenge you, especially if you're a Black woman who's been holding it together for everyone else, to consider that maybe, just maybe, it's time to let softness hold you instead. Let's start here. Spiritual well being can moderate the link between resilience and quality of life. I know that sounds clinical, but stay with me. What it really means is this: when everything is falling apart, when you're caregiving and working and grieving all at once, your sense of meaning and purpose, your connection to something bigger than the chaos can be the difference between barely surviving and actually living. There's a story I want to tell you about a group of family caregivers of terminal cancer patients, people who are facing the kind of stress that rewires your nervous system. Researchers wanted to understand how these caregivers were holding up, how they were managing to function when their loved ones were dying and their own lives were unraveling. What they found was fascinating and honestly heartbreaking. These caregivers reported emotional exhaustion, loss of purpose, strained quality of life, all the things Ida described when she talked about holding on to sanity after losing her son and watching her husband fight cancer. But here's where it gets interesting. The researchers discovered that when caregivers had high spiritual well being, meaning they felt connected to a sense of purpose, to faith, to something transcendent, their resilience actually translated into better quality of life. They experienced lower feelings of burdensomeness, more positive adaptation, and a greater ability to find peace, even in hospice settings. They weren't just enduring, they were finding moments of meaning in the midst of unbearable pain. But here's the kicker: when spiritual well being was low, resilience alone wasn't enough. You could be the strongest person in the room and still feel like you're drowning, because strength without meaning is just endurance. And endurance without purpose is just suffering in slow motion. These caregivers were in hospice settings, watching their loved ones decline, dealing with terminal diagnoses that mirrored Edita's husband's stage 4 recurrence and cardiac arrest. And what they needed wasn't just more strength, they needed a reason to keep going. They needed to feel connected to something larger than the crisis consuming their lives. The researchers found that integrating spiritual care programs, things that enhanced meaning and connectedness, alongside resilience building practices, led to broader quality of life gains. Caregivers reported lower burdensomeness and more positive adaptation. They weren't just surviving, they were finding ways to thrive, even in the darkest moments. This is why Ida's story matters. She's not just enduring, she's wrestling with spiritual questions, with the feeling of being lost and purposeless, and she's doing it while the world expects her to keep showing up, keep working, keep holding everyone else together. The research tells us that we need to integrate spirituality into oncology programs, into caregiver support systems, especially for Black communities facing health disparities. It's not about toxic positivity or pretending everything's fine. It's about finding a thread of purpose to hold on to when everything else is unraveling. It's about recognizing that our spiritual well being, our connection to meaning, can be the lifeline that keeps us afloat when resilience alone isn't enough. Now, let's talk about the second truth. Sharing feelings in safe spaces reduces isolation. And I mean, really sharing, not the sanitized, I'm blessed and highly favored version we trot out at church or on social media. I mean, the messy, honest, I resent this sometimes and I feel guilty about that version. Let me tell you about another group of caregivers. These were people balancing work, family transitions, and patient care during cancer recurrence. Sound familiar? These caregivers describe constant overwhelm, isolation, decision fatigue, and difficulty enjoying blessings. The exact cocktail Ida is navigating with her dual jobs, her daughter's move, and her grief. They were living in what I call the pressure cooker of silent suffering. They were expected to hold it together, to be strong, to keep smiling, to keep showing up. And they were dying inside. What helped? Sharing feelings through therapy, support groups, and trusted conversations. Not the kind where someone tells you to stay positive or reminds you that God doesn't give you more than you can handle, which, let's be honest, is a lie we tell ourselves to avoid sitting with someone's pain. But the kind where your emotions, all of them, the guilt, the resentment, the anticipatory grief, are validated without pressure to perform strength. One caregiver talked about how their loved one's cancer went from remission to spreading, much like Ida's husband's cancer returning right before Christmas. They described feeling invisible, like their own suffering didn't count because the patient was the one who was sick. They were working, managing medical appointments, holding their family together, and somewhere along the way, they forgot who they were outside of crisis mode. But when they finally found a space to voice the unvoiced resentment, the fear, the exhaustion, they reported feeling less isolated and more resilient. It wasn't that their circumstances changed, it was that they stopped carrying the weight alone. These caregivers found relief through practices like mindfulness, yoga, Reiki, and pre crisis end of life conversations. They learned the 7 lifestyle practices for whole being resilience, turning exhaustion into centered calm. They discovered that sharing their feelings wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign of wisdom. It was a recognition that they couldn't pour from an empty cup, that they needed to refill their own wells before they could continue caring for others. And here's where it gets real for us as Black women. We've been conditioned to believe that sharing our struggles is a sign of weakness, that airing our pain is airing dirty laundry, that if we just pray harder or work harder or smile harder, we'll be fine. But isolation is killing us literally. The stress of silent suffering contributes to health disparities, to burnout, to the kind of exhaustion that makes you forget what your own voice sounds like. Therapy, support groups, trusted friends who won't try to fix you but will sit with you. These aren't luxuries, they're lifelines. And if you're sitting here thinking, I don't have time for that, I want you to hear me. You don't have time not to. Because the cost of silence is too high. The cost of pretending you're fine when you're not is too steep. And the cost of carrying it all alone is a price you can no longer afford to pay. The third truth is this: small intentional practices build resilience, not the big dramatic overhauls we fantasize about when we're scrolling social media at 2 in the morning. I'm talking about the small stuff: mindfulness, yoga, Reiki, spiritual care, a 5-minute breathing practice before you start your day, a 10-minute walk where you're not on the phone solving someone else's problem, a journal entry that's just for you, not for God, not for your therapist, just for you. Let me tell you about caregivers who were dealing with anticipatory grief, resentment, balancing caregiving with work and kids, and spiritual questions about purpose. Sound like anyone we know? These caregivers were working with therapists who practiced trauma informed care, who validated all emotions, not just the pretty ones. They helped caregivers process medical trauma, reconnect with purpose, and rebuild identity without the pressure to wear a brave face. And the outcomes? Caregivers reported reduced burnout, honest grieving before loss, and a renewed sense of trust in the future. One caregiver described feeling erased, like their entire identity had been swallowed by the role of caregiver. They were working, managing medical appointments, holding their family together, and somewhere along the way, they forgot who they were outside of crisis mode. They felt invisible. They felt like their suffering didn't matter because the focus was always on the patient. They felt guilty for feeling resentful. They felt lost. Through therapy and intentional practices like mindfulness and legacy work, they began to reclaim pieces of themselves. Not the old self, because you can't go back after trauma, but a new self, one that could hold both grief and joy, both exhaustion and hope. They learned to validate their own emotions, to give themselves permission to feel what they felt without judgment. They learned that they didn't have to have it all figured out, that they didn't have to be healed to start healing. This is what Ida is navigating: the feeling of being lost and purposeless while the world keeps spinning, the feeling of being overwhelmed while everyone expects you to keep it together, the feeling of being invisible while you're holding everyone else up. And this is what I want you to hear: you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be healed to start healing. You just have to take one small step. These caregivers transformed their fear and resentment into dignified end of life processing and renewed trust in the future. They learned to honor their own needs, to protect their own peace, to create space for joy and rest and boundaries. They learned that softness is not weakness. They learned that rest is not laziness. They learned that asking for help is not failure. And they learned that admitting you're overwhelmed and lost is not a sign that you're doing it wrong. It's a sign that you're human. So here's what I need you to understand: the armor you've been wearing, the cape you've been carrying, the strength you've been performing, it's costing you. It's costing you your peace. It's costing you your joy. It's costing you your connection to yourself and to the people you love. And it's time to take it off. I know what you're thinking, but if I take it off, who will hold everything together? If I stop being strong, what happens to everyone who depends on me? And I want you to hear this: you are not responsible for holding the entire world together. You are not responsible for being strong for everyone else while you're falling apart inside. You are not responsible for performing resilience while your spirit is breaking. Here's my challenge to you: pick one thing, one actionable step. Seek out a support group for caregivers or grieving parents. Start a daily mindfulness practice, even if it's just 5 minutes of sitting in silence and breathing. Schedule a therapy session with someone who understands trauma, who won't tell you to just pray harder or stay positive. Do something that reclaims your purpose, that protects your peace, that reminds you that you are not just a caregiver, not just an employee, not just a mother or a wife or a daughter. You are a whole person who deserves softness, rest, and joy. And if you're sitting here thinking, but I don't have time, I don't have money, I don't have energy, I want you to remember Ida. She's working two full-time jobs, navigating compounded grief, and still showing up. Not because she has it all together, but because she's learning one breath at a time that survival mode doesn't have to be her only mode, that spiritual well being, safe spaces, and small practices can create cracks in the armor where light gets in. You deserve that light. You deserve to feel validated and hopeful. You deserve to be seen in your struggles without judgment. And you deserve to be gently reminded that spiritual purpose can emerge even from profound loss. You deserve to release the cape, to redefine strength on your own terms, to embrace softness without apology. You deserve to heal in real time, to protect your peace as a practice, and to discover purpose beyond pain. So here's what I want you to do right now, today, before you go to bed tonight. I want you to identify one thing you're going to stop carrying, one role, one responsibility, one expectation that is not yours to hold. And I want you to put it down, not tomorrow, not next, what, today, because your life, your peace, your joy, they're waiting for you on the other side of that decision. Take off the armor. Let yourself be soft. Let yourself be held. Let yourself be honest, because the world doesn't need you strong. The world needs you whole. And wholeness starts with one small intentional step towards yourself. Welcome to your soft girl era. It's time.